Well, in today's podcast, we're going to try and answer two very important questions. Can Christians drink alcohol? If so, how much? And then what about smoking marijuana? Is there any kind of biblical grounds for indulging in marijuana? Stay tuned. We've got a great podcast for you. All right, welcome everybody to the Chad Blackman podcast. I am your host, Chad Blackman. If this is your first time here at the podcast, thank you for checking this out. This podcast is all about helping you to know, love, and defend the word. Today's episode, I want to try to tackle a couple of questions that are going to become more and more prevalent in our society. These are two issues, alcohol and marijuana, that are not going anywhere. These are things that the church and especially the thoughtful Christian is going to have to think through and understand what's a biblical approach to this and what is a wise approach to this. And what's been interesting for me is that I've noticed the church tends to shy away from this topic. It seems like we're not really addressing this as much as we probably should, when it seems like a lot of the people that are sitting in the congregation are thinking about this question. How much should I drink? Am I even allowed to drink? What if I don't like alcohol, but I like marijuana? Is there freedom in Christ to smoke or ingest marijuana somehow? And so I wanted to try to tackle this issue today. And what I want to do is try to give you as best of a biblical understanding of this when it comes to alcohol especially, and then even marijuana as well. What I oftentimes find is you have the pastor or the personality sharing their opinion and kind of packaging their opinion as if it is the very word of God. And so what I want to do is just try to lay before you a very biblical case for this. I want to try to be as objective on this as I can and explain what the Bible has to say when it comes to these two aspects. So let's take one at a time. We'll start first of all here with alcohol. Can Christians drink alcohol? This raises the question, what does the Bible have to say about alcohol? And when you read through the entire scriptures, Genesis to Revelation, here's what you're going to find. You're going to find a very balanced perspective on alcohol. And what I mean by that is you're going to see a lot of verses that portray alcohol, especially wine, strong drink, are the two main terms that are used in the scriptures. You're going to see those objects referred to in not necessarily a bad light. In fact, we'll go through a couple of scriptures here. They're actually portrayed as being kind of blessed, as like good gifts from the Lord. So on the one hand, the Bible's going to show that alcohol, wine is not a bad thing. It's a gift from the Lord. And then there's a counterbalance. There's another side of the coin. The scriptures are also going to give pretty strong warnings and pretty strong cautions around this. And what I wanted to do is just show you a couple of verses here, because I think it's pretty important to know all of the positive sides that the Bible portrays about alcohol and the negative, so that you have just a clear biblical full picture of this. So let me show you a couple of verses here. I want to start with a verse that I almost guarantee you've probably never heard in church. This is a verse you're probably never going to hear a pastor give a sermon on. It comes out of Deuteronomy, of all places, Deuteronomy chapter 14:26. And I say of all places because most people think that the Old Testament, it was like real crusty and boring and dry and like no fun. God's real angry in the Old Testament. And that just isn't a fair understanding or portrayal of the Bible, especially the Old Testament. Because here's what Deuteronomy 14:26 says. It has to do with tithe money, actually. It has to do with the Jewish people bringing their tithe to what would eventually be Jerusalem. And God says here in Deuteronomy 14, if you can't bring all of your produce, if you can't bring all of your livestock and your agricultural production, sell it for money. And then what you're to do is you're to take that money and bring it eventually to Jerusalem. And here's what the text says, 14:26, spend the money for whatever you desire, oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink, whatever your appetite craves. And you shall eat there before the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household. This is a pretty crazy verse. I don't think you're ever going to hear, especially like a Baptist congregation, talk about this kind of a passage. I don't know if you've ever heard the joke, how do you keep a Baptist from drinking all your beer on a fishing trip? You bring another Baptist on your fishing trip. This passage here really is crazy. God's saying, sell your stuff, bring your tithe money, the money that's supposed to go like to the temple. Go buy sheep, oxen, wine, strong drink, whatever your appetite craves. Then get your family together, and you are to eat before the Lord your God and rejoice. Eat good food, drink good drink, be happy, celebrate before the Lord. And that's in the Old Testament. That's right out of Deuteronomy. It's crazy. There's another verse here out of the Old Testament, Psalm 104, verses 14 and 15. Here's what it says. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock, and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. So in the context here of this passage, this is a psalm. It is a song or a poem, if you will, that the ancient Israelites would have sung in their worship gatherings. And they're literally praising God for how he's created the earth. They're praising him because you make grass grow, which then feeds the livestock, which then feeds man. You make these plants grow, which feeds man. We can bring forth food from the earth because of how you've designed this whole thing to work. And then one of the things that we can bring forth is wine. And you have given wine to gladden the heart of men. And this is not something that they were talking about like in the back corners of the temple. This was like a song, a psalm, a public poem that they would have sung and worshiped God for. They're literally praising God. Thank you for all the bounty and the provision of the earth that you have given to us, which I just think is really interesting. Joel chapter 3, verse 18 and Amos chapter 9, verse 13. Both of these minor prophets predict a day and age that's coming, a messianic time. And they use the same phrase verbatim. They say the mountains will drip with sweet wine. They're predicting a future day and age where the beauty and the messianic glory of Jesus has so radically changed the world and the heavens and the earth as we know it. The phrase that they use there is the mountains will drip with sweet wine. There's debate about whether that's literal, whether that's just kind of poetic and allegorical to some extent. But regardless of how you're going to interpret that, what you do have to see is that God's using wine here in a very positive sense. He's not speaking about it as if it's a curse, as if it's something of the devil, as if it's something of the demons. He's saying when everything is made right, one of the characteristics will be the mountains will drip with wine, which is fascinating. As we move from the Old Testament now into the New Testament, we have probably one of the most famous miracles of Christ. It's in fact how he inaugurated his earthly ministry, his first miracle, if you will. At the wedding in Cana, Jesus takes about 150 gallons roughly of water, and he turns it into wine. And it's not just like cheap box wine. He turns it into some of the most incredible wine that these wedding guests and then the host, the master of the wedding ceremony, had ever tasted. And in fact, we have recorded here in this passage that the master of the ceremony stops the wedding and says to everybody, usually what people do is they give the really good wine first until everyone's had their fill and they're kind of buzzed and they're kind of having, a good time. Then they break out the cheap box wine and they break out the $2 chuck. But you have done the exact opposite. You've served good wine in the beginning, and now you're serving great wine at the end, which is crazy to me. Jesus, when he makes this, he doesn't make really ghetto, nasty, sour, lame wine. Like, this is very delicious, beautiful, like aromatic, the palate, the flavors, like the complexity of the wine. I mean, it just blew away the host of this wedding and all the guests that were there. And that's really interesting. Like he's not portraying wine as being something bad. Luke chapter 22, Jesus is having his very last meal with his disciples, and he he holds up this cup of wine, and he makes this unbelievable statement to the disciples. He says, "This cup is my blood in the new covenant that's poured out for you." And he says, whenever you gather together, you take the bread and you take this cup, and you do this in remembrance of me. Jesus uses a glass of wine. It wasn't Welch's grape juice. It wasn't, some like watered down version of wine. Like it's normal wine as we know it today. And he uses that as a living, physical, breathing picture. Like this is a tangible thing that we can hold and smell and taste and drink. And he goes, when you take this, you do it in remembrance of me. Remember my blood that is poured out for you, which is really fascinating. Once again, the Bible's not saying that wine is like inherently evil, that it's from the devil, that it's from the demons. This is something God has created. This is something that was in his mind first, and he sees it as being something good, as a gift, as a blessing. We see there's some medicinal properties to wine. 1 Timothy chapter 5, Paul tells Timothy, no longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. Apparently, Paul's protege Timothy had some stomach issues, and so Paul tells him, take some wine. The wine will help with what's going on in your stomach. What's happening here, most likely the water was a little bit polluted or had some bacteria in it, and so Paul says, if you drink some wine, that's going to help your stomach. We also see in the parable of the Good Samaritan, one of the things that the parable that shows us, the Good Samaritan heals the wounds with olive oil or some type of oil. It was most likely olive oil, but then also cleanses the wounds with wine, uses the alcohol in the wine to help cleanse the wound. So there's some medicinal properties here. And where I want to kind of put a bow on the positive side here, there's more passages here. I just wanted to give kind of a brief overview, but where I'll land the plane for the positive side of alcohol is Revelation chapter 19, where we see a future feast that is coming. It's described as the marriage supper of the Lamb. And what we have here is like in the context of this passage, you have the destruction of the Antichrist and his enemies, and the destruction of the Antichrist, his followers, and all the enemies of God. That's what I was trying to say here. And then there's this illusion, this beckoning, like blessed are all who are welcomed into the marriage supper of the Lamb. And what we know about these marriage suppers, these marriage feasts from John chapter 2, is that there's really good wine, there's really good food, there's dancing, there's celebration, there's music. This is not a lame, stiff-necked party. This is a celebration. And Jesus is like foreshadowing and predicting, hey, this is coming, and blessed are all who are welcomed and invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And I think that's really interesting, like this future feast that is awaiting for us. One of those aspects is good food, is good drink, is celebration in a holy, godly way. And man, this is something that I've just kind of been thinking about. I don't know if I could prove this definitively, but it seems like maybe more so in Protestant circles, we've lost sight of the fact that God is not against good food, good drink, good celebration. He's not opposed to those things. And maybe it's because I grew up in kind of Baptist circles. It almost got portrayed in these circles, and it was kind of done almost, it wasn't done explicitly, it was done implicitly. The idea that like if you abstain from alcohol, if you abstain from celebration and parties, and you abstain from dancing, and you abstain from like any form of outward expression, excitement, joy, that was somehow more holy and righteous. like I said, that was never explicitly taught to me, but it was kind of implicit that like a true godly person, they don't ever drink, they don't ever celebrate, they don't ever have like really good meals and feast, and like they don't do that. And yet, when I look at the Bible, I see the exact opposite. I mean, I see Jesus himself perfect in his righteousness, perfect in his adherence to the law, the very God man in human flesh. Man, he feasts and he drinks wine and he celebrates, and he I see a practice in his life of taking moments to gather with people, have good food, good drink, and celebrate unto the Lord. And I think Protestants especially have lost a little bit of this. Some of the Catholics that I've rubbed shoulders with seem to do this better than us. They seem to do a better job of gathering together, celebrating good food, good drink, and doing it unto the glory of God. And I think as Protestants, we might do well to try and learn from some of that, and really follow in the footsteps of our Messiah to do that better. So I'm trying to portray a whole picture here of alcohol, and what we see is a lot of verses that like, man, it's not a bad thing. This came from God. It's a blessing. It's used to illustrate amazing spiritual realities. It's a gift given to men to gladden our hearts. There is something good to this. But we also see, like any good gift, the enemy can weaponize it and turn it against us. Like any good gift, the gift of food, the gift of sex, the gift of money, the gift of family, all of those things can be turned into an idol and can enslave us. And so we're going to see the other side of the coin. The Proverbs, the Old Testament scriptures, the New Testament scriptures have some very clear warnings when it comes to alcohol. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. Wine is a mocker, beer is a brawler. Whoever's led astray by them is not wise. Proverbs 23, verse 20. Be not among the drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags. So this is a very good, proper, wise warning. There is a time to feast and eat and drink and celebrate. And the Proverbs go, the wise man does this properly, does this in a godly way, not in a way that is sinful, overindulgent, in a way that clothes them with slumber and rags. They do it rather in a way that refreshes their heart, in a way that brings them closer to God, brings them closer to their loved ones and family. Does it in a way that gives life to their soul, not in a way that leads them further into sin. And as they go further into sin, further into slumber and poverty and being clothed with rags. Isaiah 5:11 is going to get after all the day drinkers out there. Woe to those who rise early in the morning that they may run after strong drink, who tarry late into the evening as wine inflames them. 1 Corinthians 6:10, drunkards will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. 1 Timothy 3:8, Paul tells once again his protege Timothy here, when you're looking to appoint leaders in the church, here's something to look out for. 1 Timothy 3:8, deacons likewise must be dignified, not double-tongued, not addicted to much wine, not greedy for dishonest gain. Paul's other protege, Titus, Paul tells Titus in chapter 2, verse 3 of Titus 2:3, older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good. 1 Peter 5:8, I think this one is just one of the most powerful, clear instructions in the scriptures. 1 Peter 5:8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. The scriptures on the other side of the coin give a very clear picture. This is a good gift. However, if you turn to this gift and you start to worship the gift more than the gift giver, it will ensnare you it will enslave you, it will steal from you, it will pervert and corrupt and destroy all aspects of your life. This is what happens when we take any good gift and we elevate it above the gift giver. When we take a good gift like sex and we make it more important than the one who gave us the gift, sex will then destroy us. It will then become a trap to us because we're worshiping something that was never designed to be worshiped. And that's what can easily happen with alcohol. Alcohol can easily become something that we lean on too much for comfort. We lean on too much for peace. It can become something we lean on too much for security and identity. We lean on it for a sense of confidence, a sense of well-being. And those kind of deep soul needs are not best fulfilled by anything in creation. Nothing in creation can truly give what our souls are looking for. Only Christ can. So the difference here between drinking in a godly way versus drinking in a sinful way is that when I'm drinking in a godly way, it's done with self-control, it's done in community, it's done with celebration and rejoicing to the Lord. It's not done in a way where I'm trying to mask or hide or bury or medicate some destructive feelings, some insecurities, some maybe trauma I've got from the past. It's not done in secrecy. It's not done in a way that will ultimately lead me more into isolation instead of doing it properly, which is leading me into deeper fellowship with God and into deeper fellowship with his people. And hopefully you kind of see the difference there between the two. I think when it comes to this issue of alcohol, what most people are going to ask is, how much can I drink? The Bible's real clear. Alcohol is not bad in and of itself. It's a gift from the Lord, but it can be weaponized against you. You need to be careful with it. So this begs the question, okay, what's the limit? Is it half a drink, one drink, two drinks, three drinks? Like, what is the limit when it comes to drinking? And I think 1 Corinthians 10:23 gives us some helpful wisdom here, because I can't really give a definitive answer because it's going to look different for every person. But here's some guiding principles that will help you make this decision well. 1 Corinthians 10:23 says, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. What is meant there is that in the gospel, because we're not saved by our obedience and by our actions, we're saved by the shed blood of Christ. Christians do have an element of freedom. But Paul says here in this text, yes, all things are lawful, but no, all things are not helpful. It is not helpful. It is not wise. It is not good. It is not godly to be given over to much alcohol, to be a drunkard. That will destroy you. You do have freedom in Christ to drink. However, it's not necessarily the best thing for everyone to do. And so here's a couple of guiding principles that have helped me sort through alcohol. The first guiding principle would be this: submit your conscience to the Lord. Okay? Give your heart to the Lord and genuinely pray to the Lord. I don't want to do anything that's going to convict my heart, that's going to lead my heart into I don't want to violate my conscience, is what I'm trying to say. I want to submit my heart to you, and I want to genuinely say to you, if I'm walking out of step, show me that I'm walking out of step. Make my heart sensitive and tender to what you want from me. So that's the first thing. Put my heart before the Lord. I want my conscience submitted to the Lord. I want to walk in step with what he's got. Then I don't want to drink in a way that's going to violate that conscience. I don't want to drink in a way where I get up in the morning and I'm like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. Because that doesn't lead to joy. That does not lead to life. It doesn't lead to deeper intimacy, deeper reliance on the Lord. I don't want to drink in a way that leads to conviction, to condemnation, right? So submit my conscience to the Lord. Lord, lead me in paths of righteousness, and then I'm not going to drink in a way that convicts me. Okay. Here's the other guiding principle. Don't use your freedom to make a brother stumble. If there's a brother or sister struggling with drug or alcohol abuse, it's not a good move to drink in front of them. It's not a good move to exercise your freedom in Christ to drink at the expense of maybe causing them to stumble. So those are two principles that have helped me a lot. Personally, I'll just be honest with you how I handle alcohol. Right now, I don't keep alcohol at my house. I don't have liquor, wine, beer at my house. That hasn't always been the case. I have before, but recently I've just kind of been convicted by the Lord that it's not wise for me to keep alcohol here, because it leads me towards the temptation of wanting to drink in isolation. It leads me to the temptation of wanting to rely on alcohol to bring peace, to bring relaxation, to bring comfort. And the Lord has just convicted me that that's not a healthy way to handle it. So I don't keep alcohol here at my house. I will enjoy some good beer, some good wine when I'm out with my wife or out with some friends and family at a Christmas dinner, at a Thanksgiving dinner. I will enjoy that. And that's been a helpful parameter for me to enjoy this in community, enjoy this in celebration and thankfulness to the Lord. But it seems like it doesn't go well for me if I have it at my house. If I can drink it in isolation by myself, it just leads to isolation, separation from the Lord. So that's kind of my own personal stance and conviction on this. I don't want to drink it here at my home by myself, but I will partake if others are if we're doing this in celebration together. And for me personally, nothing really good happens after 2 drinks. So for me, it's about 1 or 2 drinks, and then try to call it quits after that. So that's alcohol. That's a lot. Thank you for listening to all that. But hopefully that makes sense. I wanted to try and give you a full picture there. All right. Now, this brings up the next question. What about marijuana? What do we do with marijuana? And I'm probably going to do more episodes on this because marijuana's got a lot of layers to it. There's even things like micro-dosing psilocybin now that's starting to become more and more popular. People are using like mushrooms to help manage PTSD, help manage depression, and Christians are going to need to think through what we do with this. But let me just give you a real quick understanding here of my stance on marijuana, and I think this is going to be hopefully based on a biblical foundation as well. I do want to give a full argument here. We'll argue medically, we'll argue scripturally, and then I'll argue from personal experience because I smoked pot every day for years and years and years. So I want to show some kind of medical stuff here, some scriptural stuff, and then personal experience. So medically speaking, Dr. Drew Pinsky, famous TV, radio, podcast personality, Dr. Drew Show, he recently published a video explaining some of the underreported effects and repercussions of marijuana. In that video, what he talked about is the increase in daily use. Back in 2011, 6% of people reported daily use of marijuana, where now in 2021, 10 years later, that number almost doubled. It's to 11% of daily use across all ages. So 2011, 10 years later, 11%, almost a double in that number of all ages daily use. It's crazy. Here's what they also found. They found that increased use of marijuana increased psychosis, schizophrenia, and bipolar mania, along with spontaneous vomiting. And they found that to be the case in mostly 18 to 25-year-olds. Increased psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar mania, and vomiting. Now, I want to be fair. This doesn't happen to most people. right? Most people don't experience like psychosis. They don't experience bipolar. They don't experience spontaneous vomiting. He's just trying to give a full picture of what's going on here. Some of the really convincing scholarship, though, came later in the video, where he cites a 2023 JAMA Psychiatry article published in 2023. They found 6.5 million Danish men and women over the age of 16. They were looking at marijuana habits amongst this group, and they found that people who regularly smoked marijuana were twice as likely to be diagnosed with clinical depression, 4 times as likely to develop bipolar disorder, and psychotic symptoms. That same study also found, amongst the same group, they found that cannabis was linked to attempted suicides, and it has increased at an average rate of 17% a year. So what that means is that if you are using marijuana on a regular basis, you do have a much greater risk factor of being diagnosed with depression, bipolar disorder, having some kind of psychotic symptom, and you are at an increased risk of suicidal ideation or suicidal attempt. It's pretty crazy. That's pretty wild. And once again, his thing here was not to scare anyone. His whole point in presenting the scholarship was not to shame anyone. It was just to put the facts out there. They cited another study in this video. A 2023 study in Norway found that 27% of people who had no previous mental disorder developed some form of mental schizophrenia or psychosis after sustained daily use. So almost, greater than 1/4, greater than 25%. People, no mental disorder, no problems at all. After sustained daily use, they were showing signs of schizophrenia and other mental disorders, which is pretty wild. That's a decent percentage to consider. Now, to be fair, I want to try to be balanced here. There does seem to be some medical benefit with cancer patients. Medicinal marijuana does seem to really help those who are in chemo, those who are struggling to maintain their appetite. THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana, does seem to help quite a bit. I've also seen some pretty incredible effects with seizure disorders and Parkinson's. It does seem like THC suppresses whatever is misfiring in the brain to cause the body to involuntarily shake. THC does seem to help with that. There's still a lot of active research being done here, so I can't draw any hard or fast conclusions. But I do think, to just be fair, I think there could be some medicinal benefits to marijuana. But it is important to know that regular recreational use does put you at a much higher risk factor for certain mental disorders. Okay. Now, that's kind of the medical side. Let me go to the scriptural side of things. Marijuana is really never explicitly talked about in the Bible. What a lot of Christians will do is they'll treat marijuana in the same way that they treat wine. In fact, the famous podcaster George Janko just the other day had a host on, and he was saying, is it okay for a Christian to smoke marijuana? I don't like to drink wine. I don't like beer. I don't like liquor, but I do like to smoke marijuana. Is that okay? This is going to be more and more common in Christian circles. Now, scripturally, here's how I would approach this. Since it's never explicitly talked about, we've got to be wise how we look at the Bible here. I think one of the clearest passages that address marijuana use and even other kinds of drug uses is in Galatians chapter 5. In Galatians 5, starting in verse 16, what we have is a list of different sins, different manifestations of the sinful nature. And what you'll see in that list is one of the manifestations of the sinful nature is a very strange word. It's sorcery in English. Now, when I was younger, I used to read that and be like, oh my goodness, sorcery, like Harry Potter, like witches and wizards and stuff like that. And I think this is where a lot of like, early 2000s resistance to Harry Potter in Christian circles came from. They were like, it's sorcery. See, don't do that. That's bad. And that might be a little bit misplaced. Here's the original Greek word there. The original Greek word for sorcery is pharmakeia. What that refers to is using chemicals. You're using drugs to induce states of worship. This was a common pagan hedonistic practice. They would use certain chemicals to induce altered states of consciousness to then interact with the divine, with the spiritual world. Now, where this becomes important is with marijuana. The primary ingredient, the active ingredient in marijuana is THC. It is a psychoactive ingredient. Anybody who's ever done a bunch of edibles will know that like a lot of marijuana to the system is psychoactive. It is a crazy experience. It's way more than just getting giggly and you get the munchies. THC is, by a chemical standard, it is a psychoactive, which means it's working in this pharmakeia sense, right? It is working in a similar sense, like mushrooms or acid or DMT. These are all psychoactive drugs. Now, they're not as strong as those, but it's working in a similar fashion. The scriptures very, very clearly, Old Testament and New Testament, prohibit us from trying to interact with the spiritual world through this method, because it opens us up to demonic influences that we're not really equipped to handle. This is why the Bible is very, very strict in terms of seeking out like necromancers, seeking out psychics, seeking out mediums, using chemicals to interact with the spiritual world. It opens us up to evil demonic influences that are very harmful to us. Now, short term, they may produce some kind of insight, some kind of wisdom, some kind of help. Long term, it always leads to our pain, our destruction, our isolation from God, and isolation from people. So in that scriptural sense, I would say we got to be very, very careful with marijuana. If this is used recreationally, if this is used in excess, it can really open us up to some evil, dark aspects. Another thing I want to point out here, when it comes to like the scriptural basis for thinking about marijuana, in 1 John, we're warned to keep our hearts far from idols, keep our hearts protected from idols. And there's a real potential here to turn marijuana into an idol, to turn it into something that replaces God. And I think it's really fascinating that, like the Rastafarian religion, if you don't know what this religion is, it's a religion that was created mostly in Jamaica. It's most popular in Jamaica. And what they believe is that this Ethiopian king, Haile Selassie the First, they believe that he is God incarnate, that he is the true reincarnation of God. They believe that salvation is through believing in him. And what's crazy about this is that Haile Selassie the First specifically said, "I'm not God." Haile Selassie has died. He did not resurrect from the dead. They believe that this is all kind of a cover-up, that this is all a conspiracy. And the important thing about this faith is that their main sacrament is marijuana. It's not taking the cup that Jesus prescribed. It's not taking the wine in remembrance of his sacrifice. It's marijuana. And so you have this whole religion here that's based upon idolatry. It's based upon a false god. This is coming straight from demons. This is a lie to distract and divert our attention from Christ. And I find it fascinating that diversion, that distraction, this false religion, its sacrament is marijuana. I just find that really, really interesting. And so I'm trying to say to the listener, let's be wise here. Let's make sure we see the forces that are at play here. 1 Peter chapter 4:7 says, "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and be sober-minded for the sake of your prayers." That's really interesting. Stay sober-minded because the end of all things is at hand, and so that you may be able to pray well. I wonder if one of the reasons why your prayers might be hindered is because you're walking in some form of intoxication, not sober minded. So there's my medical basis for understanding, thinking about marijuana. There's my scriptural basis for thinking through marijuana. And now let me give you my own personal story here. As I said, I smoked weed regularly for about 7 years of my life. And I just noticed three things about myself as I was doing this. Marijuana absolutely makes you feel happy, makes you feel silly, makes everything better for a little bit. It 100% does for a little bit. And then what followed, that kind of euphoric, happy feeling, I found in myself, I kind of slipped into this very critical state of mind. I became very, very critical. After the kind of initial high wore off, it made me really just like, I would pick everything apart. I can remember just like, it just kind of made me hate on everything. I would see the faults in everything. It made me really harsh. It made me really impatient. I would watch movies and I would just go, look at this. This is so stupid. Look at this. This is so dumb. I would listen to music and be like, oh my goodness, this music is terrible. Like it made me really harsh and critical about things. And it kind of produced character in me that I didn't particularly like. Number two, I noticed that I was way more likely to sin when I was high. I just noticed that I sinned more when I was high. I would I was way more likely to lie about things. I was way more likely to try and manipulate people, way more likely to watch porn or pursue sexual sin, way more likely to say harmful, angry, destructive things. Like I just noticed after the initial like happiness wore off, I sinned more. I don't know how else to say it. I was given over to sin more and more, even though sometimes I'd try not to. I just noticed my willpower wasn't as good. My resistance to sin was much lower. And then number three here, and this is where I was talking about earlier, there's such a potential with marijuana to turn it into an idol, to turn it into the thing that we're using to medicate guilt away, to medicate shame away, to medicate insecurities away. We're using it to numb sadness. We're using it to augment happiness. We're using it when we're stressed. We're using it even when we're relaxed. We're using it to try and heal some of the deepest parts in us that feel broken. Some of those things like way deep down in our soul, we're trying to get to those with a bong rip or with some THC vape. And I just realized after about 7 years of doing it that it didn't work. It doesn't fix those things. It temporarily numbs them, and then they're still there. And man, I think what I found is that although Jesus and Christianity, it doesn't produce like the immediate high and pleasure that marijuana will. What he does so much better is he actually fixes and heals the things that are deep and broken in us. That doesn't happen immediately. It takes time. It's not a quick fix, but it's a better fix. He is ultimately what my soul was craving for. There's this crazy verse in the book of Hebrews that everything was made for Jesus and by Jesus. And so you got to catch that first part. Everything was made for him. You're made for Christ. He made you, and you're designed by him to be in relationship with him. This is why everything else in the world will ultimately dissatisfy you. It will ultimately fail you. I'm not saying you can't find short-term happiness. You'll find short-term happiness everywhere. But you'll be stuck on the hamster wheel, always chasing more, because your soul is meant for Christ. And what I found with marijuana is that no matter how much I smoked it, no matter how high I got, it still always ended up lacking. It still always ended up coming up short. My soul still wasn't complete, fixed, healed. It didn't have rest. My soul didn't have rest until I was in Christ. So to put a bow then on marijuana here, I would say there's a couple, very few applications where marijuana can be wisely and medicinally used. However, the negatives of marijuana, I think, far outweigh the small window of medicinal use. The potential for psychosis, for suicidal ideation, the potential for increased depression, the potential that this could open you up to some evil demonic forces, the potential that this could create character and behaviors in you that you wouldn't normally do. Man, it's just through the roof. And so I would counsel just about any Christian on the planet, be very, very careful. If you're using this medicinally, be very, very, very careful and constantly be looking at your heart. Is this turning into something addictive? And I think for the majority of Christians out there who like went to the doctor in Venice Beach to get a prescription for anxieties just so they can smoke pot all the time, I would say to you, you need to quit smoking pot. You need to get sober. You need to turn from this because it's robbing your faith. It's robbing your walk with the Lord. What you really need is Jesus. So turn away from this. Come back to Christ. He's what you're ultimately looking for. Man, all right, we did a lot here. Alcohol, marijuana. I hope this makes sense to you. I hope that this gives you some things to think about, gives you a fuller picture. I hope that this was a fair treatment of these two issues, and I'm sure this will be something that we have to revisit. Thank you for listening to this podcast a little bit longer than normal, but I just think it needed this treatment. It needed to go. We needed to pull all the strings that are here. And man, there was more that we could have done. Honestly, we left some stuff on the shelf here, but hopefully this will get your mind thinking and get you stirring on all this. So thank you for listening. I'll see you on the next podcast. Hey, wait. Before you go, thank you so much for checking out this podcast. If you could do me a solid and like this, share this, subscribe, rate this podcast. I don't know what platform you're listening to this podcast on, but whatever platform you are, do the thing that is going to help this get out to more people. Not so that I'll feel good about myself, even though I will feel good about myself, but it'll help get this message out, which I hope ultimately serves the body of Christ well. Thank you for your support and partnership with that. God bless you, and I'll see you on the next one.